What Was That Like contains adult language and content and is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
And that's when I realized I had something I did not ever want to experience attached to the end of my leg.
Welcome to What Was That Like? I'm your host, Scott Johnson. This is a show where we talk to regular people just like you or just like me, who have found themselves in an extremely unusual situation. We'll hear their stories and get inside their head because we all want to know, what was that like? More information about each episode at whatwasthatlike.com. Here we go. Henry is an educator in the field of marine science. And as you'll hear when we're talking, it's not just his job, it's his life work. It's as much a passion for him as it is a career. When he goes diving in a river and kind of rummaging around the bottom, he never really knows what he'll find. What he expects to find mostly are rocks and sand. What he hopes to find are ancient shark teeth or even the skeletal remains of prehistoric creatures. What he did not expect to find was a live alligator. But one day he did, and he was lucky enough to live through it and be able to tell us the story today. And I want to say a big thank you to the patrons of this show. If you'd like to join them and support the show, you can do that at whatwasthatlike.com/support. And if you hang around after today's episode, I'll tell you about the podcast that I support through Patreon. But first, we're going to hear about what happened to Henry. How many years have you been diving?
Oh, let's see. Must be about 13 years, I think. Somewhere around there.
So you're pretty experienced then.
Yeah. I've got a little bit of experience, yeah.
Can you tell me, what is a typical dive like? I mean, are you going from a boat, or how's it set up?
Well, it really depends on what kind of diving there is. That's kind of the great thing about this hobby. You know, there's so many different kinds. You can really do all sorts of different things. I've got friends of mine who are cave divers. I have friends of mine who go spearfishing, and I've done some of these things as well. I was in the Keys last weekend I'm a scuba instructor. I was in the Keys this past weekend diving on reefs and teaching my students how to dive and having a great time. But fossil diving is a different ball game.
How is it different?
Well, for starters, where we dive is some place that most people wouldn't even get into the water. It's a black water river, we like to call it, because the water is black. You can't really see too much, and being as it's Florida, there's quite a few creatures that inhabit that river as well. And we actually,
as we're about to find out, I'm sure, right?
Yes, exactly. We do use a boat sometimes. Most of the time we use something called a mud boat, basically a little fiberglass or metal hull with a long extended motor off the back. And that's so we can go in shallow and deeper waters, because the river, it's not maintained or anything by any boating authority. So there's stumps and trees and all sorts of things floating around in there. So we were on a boat. So
this is like, you called it a black water river. Mm-hmm. And so you have to dive. Obviously, you need to bring light with you to see what you're trying to find, right?
Exactly.
What is it you're looking for down there?
We're looking for fossils. One of the amazing things about Florida is the sheer amount of history, geological and biological, that we have. Florida's been above water and underwater several times over the last several thousand and millions of years. And so we have a huge collection of natural history that can be found just underneath our feet. It's pretty cool. And the reason we're in rivers specifically is because they cut through those layers of sediment all the way down and tumbling together and exposing these fossils. So that's what we're really looking for. And it could be things from 20 million-year-old megalodon shark teeth. So I don't know if you've ever seen that recent movie with I think Jason Statham in it. Not accurate, but it did have a megalodon in it, and that was a giant 60-foot shark. So we're looking for teeth from those guys. We're looking for mako teeth, another kind of shark, all sorts of different kinds of sharks. But there's also vertebrate fossils and things like that. Most people don't really know how much history is found in Florida, but we actually had Columbian mammoths, which are actually bigger than woolly mammoths, running around on Florida about 20,000 years ago.
So you could theoretically find a mammoth skeleton in the river?
And I have, yep.
Now, you're a teacher of marine sciences. Is this stuff that you use in your classroom, the stuff that you find?
It is, yep. They are fantastic learning tools. I actually take my kids to an area where they can collect their own fossils and go sifting for shark teeth. Obviously a safe area, but they get to explore and put their hands on the world around them and the natural world that they're so lucky to live near.
That's more exciting than any field trip I went on when I was a kid, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah. When you're in the river, you're not snorkeling. You're actually in full scuba gear.
We are in full scuba gear. I have a helmet, lights, tanks, the works. A lot of stuff going on. A lot of equipment. It's very equipment intensive.
Now, what we're going to talk about happened on Saturday, March the 23rd, 2019, just earlier this year. And you were on the Peace River, and that's here in Florida. But that's a long river. Roughly, where were you, or what was the nearest town?
It's a little town called Arcadia. Some people are familiar with that. Yeah, it's kind of, if you're in the Tampa area, it would be about 2 hours south and a little bit east, more towards the middle of the state.
And to give people a picture of the size of this river, how deep is it? How far across is it?
Again, that really depends on location. Where the Peace River dumps out into the Gulf, it's quite wide. But in some of these narrow areas and bends where I'm hunting for shark teeth and other fossils, it may only be 10 feet across, 20 feet across. And again, the depth hugely varied. There's a few spots that we go to that are literally at the time of year that we go to may only be 3 or 4 inches of water. And then it goes down to 10, 20, 30 feet. So it's quite a range. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big range.
And then this river actually changes based on rainfall quite radically. It'll go up and down a good, depending on the season, 5, 10, 20 feet, especially when there's hurricanes running around. Yeah.
Yeah, that's drastic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's actually, we call it fossil season, fossil growing season, and fossil hunting season. So when there's lots of rain in August and over the summer, we call that fossil growing season because the water raises quite a bit. It's not really possible to dive. I did try one time and it's not really possible. The water's just too fast and too deep. But it's great because it starts to erode more of the bottom and more of the banks and expose more formations. And so that's fossil growing season. And then we call it a mini season in about this time of year, actually. There's about, depending on how dry it is, there's a few weeks where you can go out again, and then it's not so great until February, March. So it's a little bit more complicated.
And when you say this time of year, just so people know, we're recording this in like mid-October. So that's like the mini season you're talking about.
Exactly. Last year, I was able to dive the river. I actually dove it again 2 weeks ago. And that's actually the earliest I've really been able to dive it in a while, just because it's been so dry. So normally mini season wouldn't start until about late October, beginning November.
So the section of river where you were at that day, had you dived there before?
Many times, actually. Well, that exact section, no. I've done that several mile stretch, different spots along it. But we were actually trying to look for a new area because of the people that I was with. So I was doing some exploration. And so I hadn't dove that exact spot where the incident happened.
And who was with you that day?
I had a good friend of mine, Justin. We've been diving together for a while now, diving for fossils and hunting for arrowheads and things like that. So I had Justin, and then this YouTuber named Jake, or D Almighty. So this was my second time meeting Jake, and he came down to dive with us and kind of see what we were all about. He found us through Instagram.
So he must be local here in Florida as well, then.
No, he's actually not. He's really based kind of in Georgia, but he does come down to Florida a lot to do adventures and things like that. He's his thing is looking in rivers for, he calls it river treasure. He's found iPhones and rings and gold and a few firearms actually as well.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah, it is.
You never know what you're going to find down there.
Exactly. And I have found some weird things down there, man-made things. Yep.
Do you usually see alligators in this river?
Again, time of year dependent, but yes, we see gators on the sides of the banks all the time, and it's one of the dangers that are kind of ever present. Those and water moccasins, we see water moccasins pretty commonly as well. Most of the time, the gators aren't too big. They're maybe 3 or 4 footers sitting on the sides, and they usually disappear when they see our boat coming by. Of course, I have seen a few here and there, 10, 11 footers. We usually give them a wide berth. But it is something that we've always been nervous about. I've been diving this river for, I think this will be my 5th year in this river. And I've been very nervous about gators for the longest time in the beginning. And, I think that I probably got a little bit complacent.
Yeah, because if you had any problem with them in 5 years, you kind of think, yeah, I'm probably fine.
And I've known a friend of mine who actually kind of started me into this hobby. He's been diving it for about 25 years and never had any incident.
He started you in this hobby. Does he feel guilty now?
Well, we joke around about it a lot. Yeah, you kind of have to.
Just take us through what happened that day and how it all played out.
Jake had been diving the day before with another friend of mine, and they hadn't found too much. Jake was down here to make a YouTube video and to try and get into fossil diving. He's never found a megalodon. He had at that time never found a megalodon tooth, a giant shark tooth before, and he knew that Justin and my friend Rick and I had been finding quite a few of these and posting them on social media. So he contacted us and basically was trying to see how it all worked and try it out for himself. So he went on a Friday with some friends, and they found a few things, but nothing spectacular. So I guess they called out the big guns. They called me and Justin out because we like to call ourselves usually pretty lucky. So we planned this trip together, just the 3 of us on my friend's boat, little mud boat, as I was talking about. And the funny thing is, we were gearing up the boat, and as I said earlier, it's equipment intensive. We have to bring a lot of stuff. We got 2 tanks, each of 2 air tanks for each of us, and we like to dive with steel tanks because we can put a little bit more air inside them. So you're talking 6 tanks. Each tank is probably 30 or 40 pounds, pretty heavy, let alone all the buckets and BCDs, which are the jackets that we wear, and regulators and coolers and all this stuff we cram in this boat. And it's not a huge boat. So, we're doing a lot of work, putting wetsuits on and hoods because it can be a little chilly. And it was actually, it was March. So I was wearing 2 wetsuits because I get cold pretty easily. So I was double layering myself, which actually turned out to be pretty good idea. So I was putting on my wetsuit and Jake was putting on his, and he classically goes out with a camo wetsuit and kind of a military style vest, I would say, for sticking odds and ends in, tools, screwdrivers, things to find and pry under the water. But his wetsuit's actually camo. And so he was joking about how alligators wouldn't be able to see him and they would go straight for me because I was wearing an all black wetsuit with an all black hood and an all black helmet and all black fins. Actually, no, my fins were green, but everything else was all black. And he was saying I remember him saying something about me being a seal and a tasty snack, and that was actually how we started the day off. So ended up being a little bit fortuitous there.
Yeah, if this was a novel, that would be a foreshadowing, I think.
Yes, exactly. So we were joking around, and that didn't actually stop there. So we may have been asking for this to happen because in the water, again, I said this is my second time meeting Jake. And we were kind of messing with each other and grabbing each other's legs and pulling on them whenever we saw each other under the water. And again, remember, it's a black water river, so you can't see anything. It's pitch black other than the small bubble of light that you have with your flashlights. So any bump or pull or squeeze kind of freaks you out a little bit. But we had been messing around doing that day as well. So we're kind of funny there. I'd say we probably went a good 2 or 3 hours of time under the water without really finding too much. Jake had found a small megalodon tooth. I'd found a small couple odds and ends of random fossil and bone and things like that. And as you start to get into the hobby, you start recognizing a lot of different things. But I would assume most of your listeners don't know what a tapir is or any of that stuff. But we found a few small odds and ends, but nothing crazy. Not the big YouTube video making item that we really wanted. Jake's seen pictures of my friend and I coming up with Columbian mammoth legs and tusks and jaws and really cool, crazy stuff. So that's what he was hoping. He doesn't really know about the hours and days of work leading up to those, but he wanted something big, right?
Right. So he's thinking finding great stuff, but he's also thinking hopefully a viral video will come out of this.
Exactly. So and I wanted to live up to my end. I wanted to show him something awesome. I wanted to be part of that process. So I made a suggestion. Turns out not to be one I'll be making again. And that would be the method of discovery for trying to find different spots. So we took him to a few spots that we'd known, and those just didn't pan out. And sometimes that happens. I've gone to a spot where I pulled out a ton of really cool stuff one year, and then the next year it's been covered in sand. The river bottom changes every year, so it's kind of tough. So we took him to some well-known spots that we hadn't touched in a while, and none of those really panned out. So I suggested drifting backwards with the current, and one person kind of staying with the boat to move it every time and kind of do a leapfrog action, if you can kind of imagine that. I would get in the water and drift backwards, and they would be with the boat, and I'd pop up and they'd bring the boat to me, and then the next person would drift backwards. We actually had 2 people drifting and one person kind of with the boat. And basically we were just trying to scan the bottom for gravel beds, areas where there's a lot of fossil material that's pretty obvious. So we're looking for anywhere where there's gravel that's, I would say, is bigger than a quarter, and that's a good sign of maybe other things in that area, because a lot of the river is just silt and sand, and you're trying to avoid that because you're never going to find anything there. So I said, all right, let's leapfrog down this river and just scan the bottom, and whenever we hit some gravel, we can anchor up the boat and take a further exploration and further look at that area. And so that was working for a little bit. I was drifting backwards, and I found a spot, and we'd explore the area. We found a few more cool things, but again, nothing crazy. And I'd say it was about 1:00 in the afternoon, and I was drifting backwards, trying to find a new spot. And at first, I sincerely thought that it was Jake messing with me again. I didn't realize at that time that I was the furthest one down the line. There was no one behind me, but I felt a really, really strong squeeze on my leg and on my foot. And for a split second, I was like, oh man, that's Jake again. And then it got stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's when I realized I had something I did not ever want to experience attached to the end of my leg. It happened really fast at the time, but it's strange. Time seems to have, it speeds up and slows down in my memory. So those first few seconds are really slow. Just a crushing, squeezing feeling, me thinking, oh, is that my friend? No, this is way too strong. And then it speeds up, and I remember grabbing my BC and inflating. My BC is the jacket that allows divers to go up and stay at the top with a lot of air, or deflate and go down. So I remember grabbing my controller for that and inflating and spinning, and it's black. We were probably maybe in 7 feet of water at that time.
7 feet of water. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say something like that. And I remember grabbing my jacket, my BC, and pressing that controller and inflating and just kind of flailing around in the darkness. And I started getting spun around, and the river is it was more of a constriction in the river. It really wasn't that wide at that point. So I was spinning and tumbling and inflating my jacket, and I just feel this twisting motion on my leg. And I just knew I had to go with it, go with the flow, don't resist it. And at the same time, the with my right leg, I'm just kicking, trying to pull my left leg out from whatever it was. Ended up being that alligator. We got to the top, and that's when time slows down for a second again, at least in my memory. I look at the end of my leg, and attached to it is this huge alligator head on my leg. And I kick, and I'm kicking, and I'm kicking. And if you've ever seen an alligator feed, maybe if you've been to one of the alligator shows, or if you've been to the Everglades or anything like that, whenever they're thrown food or whenever they're attaching themselves and trying to bite onto food, sometimes they do something called a readjustment bite, and they'll shake their head back and forth and open their jaws and clamp down, trying to get a better grip. And so I'm fighting, I'm kicking, and pushing with my free leg. And that alligator does that adjustment bite. It opens his mouth just a little bit, not a ton, just a little bit, and I'm able to pull my foot a little bit further out. And then it clamps down again. Luckily for me, it was on my fin. I was able to rip my foot out of the fin. And I honestly don't remember getting out of the water. I was just all of a sudden free of that alligator, and then I was on shore. And I don't remember anything in between there. I must have walked on water.
What would have been the gators' plan of attack? Well, how do they kill you?
Well, they do something called a death roll. Usually, it's an apex predator. The crocodiles and alligators have been around for millions and millions of years. They were around when the dinosaurs were here, so they've got a system, and it works. And usually, they go for prey that they can overpower, and then they twist pieces off. And they do something called a death roll, and they latch onto a limb or onto a piece of whatever their hopeful meal is, and they start spinning, and they rip it off. They don't have sharp teeth like sharks. They don't slice and cut. They crunch and rip and pull. And I knew that I could not allow that to happen. I had to make myself too much trouble to be worth it. And that's what I did. I was kicking and pushing and pulling and fighting every second.
What was it, a factor that you had scuba gear on and you could breathe more easily? Like if somebody was just out swimming, mm-hmm. They would have a limited time under the water before they start to drown.
I think part of what saved me is my training, even though it's not meant for something like this necessarily. As a scuba instructor, I'm always telling people the number one killer of divers is panic. It's not running out of air. It's not getting trapped in a shipwreck or underneath a log. It's doing those things and then panicking. So yes, I was fighting. I was scared, but the fear didn't really catch up to me until I was on shore. But I knew that I had to fight. I knew I couldn't let go of that regulator. I knew that air was my life. If it had twisted off my foot or stuffed me underneath a log somewhere, if I had my regulator, I could still breathe. And that was the most important thing. And that's why I teach my students. Hold on to your regulator. If something happens, if you get pulled into a current, if you get caught up in a line, you need to keep your air source with you at all times. And that's what I did. So that part of my gear and part of my training definitely had an impact on how I was able to survive this ordeal. But I think also, remember when I said I was wearing 2 wetsuits because I get cold? I'm kind of a big baby with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was wearing about 8 millimeters of neoprene on me at that time. I was wearing 2 wetsuits. One was a 5 millimeter and one was a 3. So he wasn't able to, it's almost like having blubber on my leg. It wasn't able to penetrate as deeply into my leg and get that great of a purchase. And I honestly don't think he was really trying to hunt me out, hunt me down. He probably didn't know I was even in the water until I shoved my foot into his mouth. As I said, it was in more of a narrow restriction of the river, only about 7 feet deep.
So you may have just drifted right into him.
I may have just drifted, and that's what I'm thinking. Every part of me was black. I was wearing a black wetsuit, black helmet, black hood. Everything was black. Even my gloves were black, except for my fins. My fins were like this bright neon yellow. And so maybe as he saw that fin drive past him, fly past him with the current, maybe he thought that was a fish or something that he could take down because he didn't see the rest of me because I was all kind of camouflaged there. That's what I'm thinking. And so it jumped onto it, and then may have done that readjustment when it realized that I was a bit more than what it was hoping for.
How would it have been different if he had grabbed your arm instead of your leg?
Oh man, I don't even want to imagine.
You could still kick with both legs, but
yeah, I could kick, but what would I be kicking? If he grabbed my arm, I'd be kicking his legs or his tail. Maybe that wouldn't have done anything. The fact that he grabbed my leg meant I knew exactly where to kick to try and get its face.
And even better, the lower part of your leg.
Exactly. It was the bite was actually right across my heel, so you can actually see tooth marks on my foot and on my upper I guess my calf area. So it was right across that heel joint. So right where the fin meets the foot or meets the leg, basically.
So you got away from him and at that point, your main goal is just to get out of the water. Did he pursue you at all?
Nope. I remember seeing his face on my foot, and I remember kicking and kicking, and then that whole readjustment bite, and then pulling free. And after I pulled free again, I blank out for a second there. I just teleport from I'm out of the mouth. I'm on the shore, and then I don't see him at all until maybe 2 minutes later when I'm still waiting for my friends. They haven't realized this yet. 2 minutes later, I see his head pop up on the other side of the river. And then that was the last time I saw him, because a few minutes after that, my friend Jake finally realized what was happening, and he came over, and the alligator disappeared. But it was actually it took several minutes for anyone to notice. So if I was bleeding out, if God forbid my foot had been taken off and I was bleeding out, it would have taken quite some time for someone to realize, because it took maybe 5 minutes for Jake to pop his head up the first time. And I was kind of shocked at the time, obviously. So I kind of calmly said to him, "Hey, I've been bitten by an alligator." And he was pretty far away from me, so he didn't really understand what I was saying. He just saw me sitting on the bank. He actually went back down. He went back down and started diving for another 5 minutes. And then he popped back up and saw that I was in the exact same spot on the bank. And I said it a little bit louder the second time. And if you watch his video, at that point, he realizes, oh, I need to get over there now.
Right.
And my friend Justin is also underwater somewhere further upriver.
Yeah, Henry, you've been attacked by an alligator. We'll be with you in a few minutes there.
Exactly.
We got some stuff we're looking for.
Exactly.
Man. So what were your injuries? I mean, how bad was the bite?
I got so lucky. I probably got the best case scenario. I got a great story out of it, but I didn't really lose too much. I didn't really get too much damage on my leg. I have tooth marks going across my foot, 2 on each side of my foot. One a little deeper where it actually tore further through both my fin and my booties. And then 2 smaller holes, very, very small scars on my calf area. And I think that's because I was wearing so much wetsuit up there. On my foot, I was only wearing a very thin boot. So it was able, and I actually I still use those boots, and I get to tell the story to my students, and I get to show them the holes in my boots, and it's pretty funny. But so I have some nerve damage in my foot. I can't really feel it's my left foot, and I can't feel too much on the right side of my left foot, all around that scar, just from the crushing damage. As I said, they don't tear and cut like sharks do, for example. They crush. And so when I went to the hospital, their biggest thing was trying to figure out if I had broken any bones. But I didn't get to the hospital for hours. Hours, actually.
Because where you were not really near a hospital.
I was several miles upriver from the nearest boat ramp. And so Jake had to get me, and then Jake had to go get my friend Justin, pull Justin up, and Justin and Jake pulled the boat over to me, and we had to load up all our gear and then drive me all the way to the boat ramp.
Yeah, you obviously can't leave everything out there.
Right,
And
exactly. And I wasn't bleeding. It was cold, so my foot was kind of blue already, because it was the water is pretty cold, and so I didn't bleed out too much for a while. I just remember I was sitting at the bow of the boat, and Justin and Jake were driving me back, and we pass a group of maybe 15 sifters, and those are people who go out with they're almost like grates, with chicken wire and wooden frames, and they're digging with shovels in the river and trying to look for teeth and other things as well. And so we passed this group of sifters, me sitting on the bow, holding my foot, blood kind of welling up between my fingers. And we were kind of shouting at them what happened. And I remember one woman says, "Oh, hell no, I'm out of here." And she immediately climbs out of the river onto the bank and pulls her son with her. She had a younger son with her. And so I got a decent laugh out of that.
Well, I mean, I'm a parent too. If I were out there with my kid and there's what you're picturing in your mind is a rogue gator going around attacking people, I'd get out of there too.
Yeah. Obviously, a gator would never have anything to do with a group of 15 people walking and standing around making a lot of noise, but so it took probably an hour for us to get back from the dive spot, and then we still had to load our cars, and I drove separately. We all drove separately, all three of us. So I wasn't about to just leave my car. I had no way to get out of there without driving myself. And luckily it was my left foot, so I was able to use my right foot, and I drove the 2 hours back to St. Pete. And that's kind of when I decided, well, I should probably get this looked at, because alligators have notoriously dirty mouths.
That's what I was wondering too. And just the fact that it was in the dark, a black river, what was the concern for bacteria or infection?
Big concern. I went to a hospital in St. Petersburg. And again, this is actually pretty humorous after the fact. But I walk in with no shoes, because I don't even know where they ended up. I had flip-flops at some point, but I lost those. So I walk in with no shoes, still in my bathing suit, soaking wet, dirt and Blackwater River smeared all over my face. And I walk in there telling the front desk that I got bit by an alligator. And this was a hospital that is nowhere near anywhere you would probably get bitten by an alligator.
They don't get too many of those, huh?
No. They actually said, I remember when I finally got into a room, and it didn't take long, the nurse came up to me and she was like, "You got bit by what?" An alligator. And then as I was waiting for the doctor, I just hear across the hallway from behind a curtain, "We have a gator bite." Yeah, a real gator bite. So I hear all the staff of the hospital talking to each other. Apparently I was their one and only ever gator bite, and they've been in operation for quite a few years. So it really doesn't happen that much. It's only been maybe 400 in the last 50 years, something like that. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I was surprised at the numbers on that it's, you think about it, that you think, wow, it must happen all the time, especially here in Florida, because we see them, people see them on the golf course or whatever. And I mean, I've had friends who have a lake, behind their house, and they've several times they've had to come and have trappers come and take gators away because they're just crawling around, and there's people, they're in a regular neighborhood. So, but it doesn't, in spite of all that, gator attacks really aren't that common.
No, I was also very surprised when I looked at the numbers on this. I did the same exact thing. I went on Google and typed in alligators and found all the reports and found that it doesn't really happen that much, at least unmolested, without being someone who's messing around and trying to grab the gators.
Right. Trying to provoke something.
Yeah. Exactly.
So did you have any infection or any problems?
No. So when I got to hospital, they immediately flushed out the wound and cleaned it out. And because luckily, I guess kind of luckily for me, because of the nerve damage, I actually, on my biggest wound, I didn't really feel them probing around in there, because they were flushing it out and sticking tubes and other things inside the wound, cleaning it out. and they put me on a round of antibiotics for about 2 weeks. But they couldn't stitch it up, unfortunately. With bites like that, they're really nervous about stitching in bacteria and closing up the wound and then having an infection set in because it can't naturally flush itself out. So I've actually got it's kind of keloided, it's kind of raised and bumpy because they couldn't stitch it up.
That's kind of cool, though. You can show people your scar and say, "Hey, guess how this happened?" Right?
Exactly.
It was kind of fortunate that when this happened, that you had Jake there, who he's a pretty major. How many subscribers does he have on his YouTube channel?
I think he actually just broke 8 million the other week.
That is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So he was there, and although he didn't get the actual, he must be regretting not getting the actual attack.
I had a GoPro on. I just didn't turn it on at that time.
Oh,
so I could have had it all from point of view. I'd rather never do that again. Subscribe that footage, but
no, you don't want to do that. But yeah, if that would have been on, you could have had 8 million subscribers on your own. That kind of video. He did film as you were calling out. You were calling from the bank of the river there, saying, "Hey," and he's on his way. I'm going to have a link to that, or actually, I'll probably just put that video on the website in the show notes for this episode, so people can watch that.
Yeah, Jake would love that, of course. I think the video's got at least 1 million views already.
What happened? There was something with the flipper. Did you lose a flipper, or what happened with that?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. So the alligator took my fin, disappeared off with it, and of course I thought I'd never see that again. I've lost things in that river before, tools, or I've actually lost a whole set of fins before when I left it on the side of the bank and an airboat came by and flushed the fins right into the water, and they got taken by the current and disappeared. So I never expected to see that fin again. But I got contacted on my Instagram account. I have an account on Instagram for posting all these things. It's think seek. So thinking about what I want to seek for, think about what I want to hunt for. Anyway, so I had someone private message me on that profile with a picture of a fin saying, "Hey, I saw Jake's video. I saw D Almighty's video. Is this your fin?" He had actually gone out snorkeling looking for shark teeth the next day. And the video didn't come out until about a week later, but he had gone snorkeling the next day, found that fin, picked it up, and then thrown it in his truck and forgot about it until he saw the video and recognized me and the story and the fin, because I think in the video I lift my fin up and talk about it or something like that. And so he messaged me saying, "Hey, is this your fin?" And it's a picture of my exact fin, and it's even got holes in the side of it from where the teeth marks entered it. And I was talking with him, and we were going to meet up, but we kind of never really got around to it. Summer was happening, so as a teacher, I had my summer break, and I was doing a lot of I was teaching classes and doing some other things, and we never really got around to it. About 2 weeks ago, I was out on a friend's property digging for arrowheads. That's another thing that I do aside from looking for fossils. I look for Native American artifacts on private property. And so I was out there on my friend's property looking for arrowheads, and he invited another one of his mutual friends and their friend. So this is a few friends removed at this point. Turns out that friend's friend was the guy who found my fin. And so we were 20 feet apart. We didn't even realize for a while. We were 20 feet apart, digging our own holes, looking for artifacts. And we just start chatting about what other things we do and blah, 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 blah. And somehow we get on the topic of looking for fossils. And naturally, I pull out my alligator story because it's a great story. And he was like, "Wait a minute, are you so-and-so?" And he's like, I have your fin in my truck. And so
that's incredible.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a small world.
So the fossil geek community is pretty small. It sounds like.
Yeah, pretty small. Exactly.
What could you have done anything to avoid this?
Yeah, so it's.
I mean, other than not going in the river,
Right. I went diving I knew that if it had freaked me out. I'm this is a few months removed from the incident now, so I'm pretty calm and I can kind of laugh about it and talk about it. But I'm gonna be honest, that first week or two, I was pretty freaked out. But I knew that this was something that I still wanted to keep doing, and I didn't want to get so psyched out and let so much time go by that I would never get back in the water again. So I knew that I had to kind of get back on the horse. And I think maybe it was 3 weeks later after that incident, my friend said, "Hey, I know all this happened, but are you interested in diving again?" And I said, "Yes, let's go. Let's do it right now. I need to get back in the water." And so I was back in there and moving a little bit more cautiously. I still do. I was in the water again 2 weeks ago from now, but yeah, I just knew I had to get back in there.
You were just drifting, and you think you probably just kind of drifted into him.
Yes,
But
yeah.
there's no way to see. He couldn't have seen you coming, and you couldn't see him. So it's just something that might happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that it's a risk. I can minimize the risk by not covering as much area in such a way. I was in the water drifting backwards, and we would go quarter mile to half mile stretches at a time as we were leapfrogging. That's covering a huge amount of distance. You will 100% see an alligator somewhere in that region, hopefully on the side, but maybe behind you. Historically, we would bang on the boat and throw rocks in the water and try and make a lot of noise, and then we would move up current, give whatever was near us plenty of time to get out of the way, and that's what I've done since, and I don't think I'll ever do the drifting backwards thing again. But it is inherently a risk. And I'm stupid enough, I guess, to take it. I love collecting. I love the history, and I found some amazing things. I've actually, a friend of mine, his name is Rick. We donated a Columbian mammoth find to the Florida Museum of Natural History last year, and they're using it to write a paper. And I had it in my classroom for a little while. Not the whole thing, obviously, but I had a leg bone and some vertebrae and one of his tusks and all these things. So it's something that I personally love as a hobby, and I think I can also kind of contribute a little bit to others' education on Florida's natural history.
It's something you're passionate about. You obviously want to keep doing it, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Something just occurred to me though. When you're out in the river and you find these things, obviously that have historical or geographical value, whose property is that?
That's a great question. With shark teeth, due to the sheer number of shark teeth that are found in Florida and other places, at least in Florida law, you don't have to have any special license or anything like that to have shark teeth and collect those. Anything else though, vertebrate fossils, so things like the mammoth, or I find ancient giant sloth teeth and claws and things like that. Anything vertebrate, you need to have a fossil license, and you can get that through the University of Florida and the Gainesville Museum. And it's not expensive. It's about $5 a year for that license. And every time I find something that's vertebrate, so anything that I find that is not shark or fish, we document, and then we inform. And you're supposed to. Not everybody does, but you should, and we do. We document and inform the university, and if they want one of our finds as part of having that license, they can take that and utilize it for scientific purposes. And they didn't ask for the mammoth, but they kind of hinted that they would appreciate it. And my friend and I, but they could have taken it, but I know Dr. Hulbert, that's the guy who runs the entire state program. I've met up with him a few times now. So they requested the mammoth, and my friend and I, we donated it to them. So,
well, yeah, being good stewards of this kind of item, it's pretty obvious that that's what you'd want to do. I'm sure.
Exactly. But a lot of these things, it's kind of tough because, of course, there is some knowledge to be gained from the fossils and from what is found. Unfortunately, with river finds, often location is kind of not as useful because the river tumbles and pushes things together. We have 10 million year old shark teeth next to 10,000 year old mammoth stuff. So that isn't as necessary to record like exact location, and general areas are good, but you can't get too specific with that.
Right. You won't see any trends or anything if it was tracked, probably.
But there are microfossils and things. So when I gave the leg bone to Dr. Hulbert, he was able to examine that and look for things like ancient pollen spores that are embedded within all the way up inside the bone. So there are things that you can do to help date and put in relation to other things.
So people like that must be pretty happy that stupid people are going out in the river with the alligators to to find these things and bring them back, and they just say, "Okay, that's great, I'll take it."
We've joked about that before. He said, "Yep, you guys go ahead. I will not be in that river, but let me know what you find."
It is a great story, man. It's just crazy. So we'll have on the show notes for this episode, we'll have Jake's video, and I'll put your Instagram link on there. So if people want to follow you and see what you're up to, once again, the Instagram handle is ThinkSeek, ThinkSeek, all one word on Instagram. And we'll look forward to seeing what great things you find in the future. Hopefully no more alligators.
Hopefully.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Treasure hunting and fossil hunting does sound fun, but personally, I think I prefer hobbies that don't involve potential alligator attacks. Now, before we wrap up this episode, I want to tell you about a podcast that I listen to and support. It's called Darknet Diaries, and it's hosted by a guy named Jack Rhysider. The tagline for this show is True Stories from the Dark Side of the Internet. Now, for me, it's a great show because of two factors. First off, it's all true stories. Jack confirms the facts for his show, just like I make sure the stories here on this podcast are true. And I do love some crazy true stories. And second, for me anyway, it deals with some subject matter that interests me. Computers, the internet, technology, hacking, all that stuff. A recent episode was about a guy who put credit card skimmers on gas pumps and how that scam usually works. But even more scary, now there are credit card skimmers on e-commerce websites, and there's really no way for you to know it. Darknet Diaries is over 50 episodes dealing with all kinds of cool stuff like that, which you won't find on other shows. Jack started this podcast as just a one-man show, doing all the work himself. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it's a lot of work. And in the beginning, it's difficult because you really don't have an audience. You just have to keep at it, keep promoting, and keep putting out good quality content, and eventually the masses will find the show. That's what's happened to Jack and Darknet Diaries, and I see a lot of similarities with my podcast, What Was That Like? It just keeps growing as more and more people discover it. Now Jack has a team of people, and he's able to do the podcast full time. And Darknet Diaries has a Patreon account, and I support that show every month because I really like the content, and I think it's worth paying for to make sure it keeps going. So I would encourage you to check it out. You can get it on any podcast player or at darknetdiaries.com. And if you like this show, I invite you to become a supporter at whatwasthatlike.com/support. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.